Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Laying the Breadcrumbs Down. I am your host, Dr. Alexia Mays, and we're going to be talking about issues that are affecting our communities and issues that we need to speak on and get involved in. And some of these issues are going to be issues that you know about, and some of the issues are going to be issues that you're going to learn about. So we're very excited to have you here with us tonight for another great show with another great guest. Tonight, we're going to have attorney Gerald Griggs from Atlanta, Georgia, who is not just a regular attorney. He is a truth and justice fighter. He is also an advocate. He has been on the front lines of social justice issues, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. He has been involved in trying to get voting rights passed. He has been involved in justice for things that have happened into his communities and outside of his communities. What we want you to understand is social justice and advocacy is a lot more than just sitting on a computer or going to an event. It's time. It is a lot of time that is invested into it and a lot of personal time. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes into fighting for equality. And so we're very honored tonight that Attorney Griggs would take time out of his busy schedule to join us so that we can talk to him about some of the things that are going on in his area and some of the things that he is working on, as well as some of the things that he's been a part of and spearheaded in his area as well as other areas. And what we hope from our justice and truth people in our community is that they will be listening with open ears and open hearts so they can find out how we can get involved in our own communities. Take some notes, go out and do something in your own communities that can impact and make change. This isn't a trend, people. We've been doing this for a very long time. This isn't just about the civil rights movement. It's not just about women's rights, health, equality, and justice. This is a movement that has not stopped, and we've got to figure out a way to get equality and justice for not just our communities, but for everyone. And so that we listen, learn, and get involved. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Attorney Gerald Griggs so he can explain to us what's going on. And he's going to give us a little bit about what he's been doing and what we can do, and not just his community, but in our communities. Thank you, Attorney Griggs.
Thank you for having me.
So what I'd like to do is start off by you introducing to our audience who you are, some of the things that you're involved in, some of the things that are going on, and also I'd like you to bless our audience with some of the knowledge and experience that you have and some of the things that are going on, especially when we're talking about voting rights and things that we can do, not just by talking about it, but actual movement and some of the things that you suggest that others do in their communities.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for having me on the platform. It's great to be with you guys. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm Attorney Gerald Griggs. I am a Georgia native, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm currently an attorney. I've been practicing for 17 years, primarily in the area of criminal defense, civil rights, personal injury, and some education law. I've been blessed in my travels to graduate from Woodward Academy, Emory University, and the University of Cincinnati College of Law. And after that, I passed the bar and been practicing law ever since. I've been in some of the most high-profile cases in Georgia, whether that's the Jaheim Herrera anti-bullying case, Georgia's longest trial, the Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal trial, and have represented clients in the R. Kelly sex trafficking case. So I've been in a lot of cases, and I'm also an activist. I've been with the Atlanta NAACP now for 8 years in various capacities. I was the second vice president. Now I'm the first vice president. I've also previously been the third vice president of the State Conference of Georgia, and I'm currently a candidate for presidency of the State Conference of Georgia. In those capacities, I've led the longest and largest marches in Georgia history. We've been on the front lines fighting for Black lives, fighting for Black votes, fighting to make sure that we empower women and making sure that we are empowered with our voting rights and all of our civil rights. So we've been on the front lines, been involved in the Ahmaud Arbery case in Brunswick, Georgia, been involved in the Cartersville 70 case in Cartersville, been involved with many social justice issues in the metropolitan area in the city of Atlanta, but we service all of Georgia. And so currently, we're working on voting rights. We've been fighting against SB 202, which many of you have heard of, is the new voter suppression law here in Georgia. We call it Jim Crow 2.0. I was also honored to represent State Representative Park Cannon, who was arrested for knocking on the door to try to see the signing of the bill by our governor, and was ultimately arrested and led to continued protest of Georgia and all of the things that you've been seeing both here in Georgia, around the country, and in Washington, D.C. So that's just a little bit about me. But I consider myself an activist, an attorney, and an advocate. And we're always fighting to make sure that our rights are enlarged and not retrenched. And we will just continue to elevate the voices of the voiceless and be on the front lines for justice.
Now, we've talked, and I think this is an important issue and important for you to address this, because so many people have spoken about turning Georgia blue and thought that it was a snap of a wrist and all of a sudden Georgia turned blue. And so you have a lot of people saying, we want to do like Georgia, thinking that Stacey Abrams came along and didn't, put in, like, they're not understanding this is work that has been done for years. And this is a collaborative effort. And there are so many people that are involved in making this happen. So if you could speak to just what you see and what you've been involved with and what you've seen happen and what can happen within getting those voter rights and escalating Georgia to being such an important factor in last year's election.
Well, one thing that people need to remember is that Georgia has been the centerpiece of civil rights for a very, very long time. And so the process of changing the demographics in Georgia started 15 years ago. And so you have so many people that have been a part of what happened in the 2020 election and the 2021 election. Of course, we owe a lot of the ground game and the organizing to so many African-American females, African-American women who've been on the front lines for years. I always say that the mother of voting rights and the mother of the movement is Helen Butler, who is the executive director of the People's Coalition, the organization that Dr. Joseph Lowery started. Of course, we owe a big amount of gratitude to the former leader of the House, Leader Abrams, Stacey Abrams, who was on the front lines with Fair Fight and the New Georgia Project. But there were so many others. Black Voters Matter with Cliff and Latasha. Of course, the NAACP, which organized a 19 county strategy where 77% of the vote from Georgia originated. And we made sure we connected with those branches and mobilized with so many other groups, Fair Fight and New Georgia Project and Black Voters Matter and our API, Asian Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, and our Latino brothers and sisters all over the state to make sure, one, that we registered as many Georgians as we could, but more importantly, that we mobilized. We also tapped in to our brothers and sisters in the Panhellenic Council, all of the Greek letter organizations mobilized around the state, because even though the Georgia NAACP has well over 85 chapters, there are Greeks in all 159 counties of Georgia. We also partnered with the Prince Hall Masons and the Eastern Stars, who all have members throughout the state of Georgia, and we just mobilized. We also owe a lot of the moving people around to NACA, which moved in during the October and November portions and were driving people to the polls. Uber and Lyft was driving people to the polls, and we were making sure we got the message out, and we were in a coalition. So it was really a coalition of workers. But the idea started, I must be honest, from the State Conference of Alabama, who in the 2015-2016 organizing cycle got Doug Jones elected because of the work of the State Conference in Alabama. And we saw the same thing could be done here in Georgia. And we do believe it could be replicated throughout the South because what we did was we made sure we targeted the Black Belt. You know, most people think of Georgia and they just think of Atlanta, metropolitan Atlanta. But there's a black belt that runs through the middle of the state, between Macon and Columbus and Augusta and Albany. There's a black belt that goes all the way through that middle part of the state, where if you can engage those voters, get them mobilized, make sure they're registered, and make sure they understand what's at stake, they will turn out. And they turned out in massive numbers. We had almost 6 million people vote in the November election, and then they said, well, we can't do it again. So we just made sure we continued to organize with our coalition and did it again in January. And so you saw the presidency be delivered, and then you saw the Senate be delivered because of the work of organizers in Georgia. And so I'm just happy to have been a part of that. Again, it was so many people, and I don't want people to think it was an overnight success. You know, a lot of people poured resources into Georgia after the 2020 election. The 2020 election, the mobilizing came from within Georgia. After the 2020 election, 2021, that's when the nation's eyes were fixed on Georgia, because we had two senators that were going to be elected in Georgia. And that's when the national resources, and we are very appreciative of that. But it was Georgia organizers that were making sure that we were at the forefront, particularly Black women that were at the forefront. And so I just want to be able to tell people that this is a model that can be taken around the South in organizing. And I think what people need to understand about Georgia is that, you know, if we work together, not working in silos, not trying to make sure one person or two people or three people take all the credit, but as a coalition, we can do it again. And we are prepared to do it again in this midterms. We're already having conversations with the coalition to start on February the 1st, making sure we have robust voter registration, but more importantly, voter mobilization ahead of the primary season, which is in May. One thing that's great about Georgia and the work of so many activists and organizers is 95% of Georgia voters are registered to vote. Voter registration is not the problem in Georgia. The problem was mobilization. And we're already starting our messaging to make sure people are engaged, to understand why it's important to go back out and vote. And I think the key to the mobilization and the organization was the promise of the organizers, not only to get people to the polls, but to hold accountable elected officials once they are elected. So I think that was the key. And I'm just honored to be a part of such great organizers like Helen Butler, like Latasha Brown, New Georgia Project, Fair Fight, all of the NAACP, the Prince Hall Masons, the Eastern Stars, of course, Labor, and of course, the Panhellenic Council, and so many others that were a part of this Herculean effort that turned Georgia Black. You know, people talk about Georgia turning blue, Georgia turned Black. And so what we need to do is just to make sure we can replicate that, even with the attempts to roll back our rights. I think we will be successful.
Now, you spoke, and I think it's very important for me to touch bases with you on this. One of the things that I find when I'm going out on my travels, speaking to groups and speaking to people, is we have a lot of voter apathy out there. Yes. And a lot of the voter apathy comes from, this is what we hear. They all going to come and tell us the same old thing, get our votes, and then we're not going to see them again for another 4 years. And so people feel like their votes are taken for granted. They feel like what they have been told is not ever going to come through. And they feel like if nobody is holding people accountable, then why should they go out and vote? So what are you guys doing when it comes to voter apathy? When you come across voters like this, as you said, one of the biggest problems, and it's not just in Georgia, I find this in my travels in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, all the areas in the South, people are saying, y'all want our vote, but you don't want our voice. So what are you guys doing in those areas to handle that, or should I say to counteract that voter apathy?
And that's why I think it's important that we, you know, once we shift from voter mobilization, we shift into voter accountability. And that's where we hold our elected officials accountable. And I think one of the great things is there are organizations in Georgia like Protect the Vote, GA, that were outside for 30 days outside the state capitol, and we'll be outside again, holding our elected officials accountable. One thing I can say about Georgia is that our elected officials are responsive when we come to town halls, when we email, when we call them, when we show up for their office hours, when we show up at Zoom town halls. And that's what we've been doing. We actually were doing that from the 2016 cycle all the way to now. The biggest protest in Georgia history was on Inauguration Day in 2017 in response to the shocking election of the 45th president of the United States. And after that, we had 14 straight weeks in front of our senator's office demanding a meeting with David Perdue. So when people say they were shocked to see David Perdue was not reelected, we were holding him accountable all the way up to the election. And now we have a direct line with both of our senators where at any given time we can call them, we can have a conversation with them, make sure they are presenting legislation that speaks for the voice of Georgia, which they are responsible. If they do not if they become unresponsive, we'll do the same thing. And so I think the way you combat voter apathy is by holding elected officials accountable. I mean, showing up at the state legislature. We will continue to do that. We've been doing it. We showed up at the redistricting hearings with local activists. We showed up at local election boards to make sure they were not closing local election boards. My good friend Helen Butler was in Lincoln County where they were trying to close 7 precincts there. They were successful in keeping those precincts open and engaging the people. Another thing that we have been very successful at doing is most people just canvass during election season. We still are canvassing, still knocking doors, still making sure we are responsive to the people. And so I think that's how you combat apathy. We also have to remember that elections are not just national elections. We have state and local elections. You have to get involved because all elections, all politics are local. And so if you understand that, that means municipal races, that means county races. It's easy to touch those elected officials who actually do the day in, day out work of governing, whether that's county elections and going to the county meetings and making sure you're apprised of the budget and where all of the items are going from your taxes. And then, of course, the local boards, school boards, election boards, all of the boards that are important and are integral in the day-to-day operations of government and how it affects the actual citizens. So I think that's what we're doing to combat apathy. We're not just going to say, come out and vote every 2 years or come out and vote every 4 years. We're going to hold these individuals accountable. We did it with the president of the United States. You know, he gave 2 speeches on voting rights. One was at Atlanta, in Clark Atlanta University, and they were activists outside. Many of them are probably watching this live stream, so shout out to them. They were holding him accountable for the promises that he made during the campaign trail, and they'll continue to hold him accountable. Black women have been getting arrested since July in Washington, D.C. to even get a conversation and a debate and a vote on voting rights. So that's just some of the ways that we are staying engaged on the issues that are important to African Americans, that are important to Georgians, and important to people throughout the South. We've been calling for actual legislation on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We've been calling for legislation and action on voting rights, whether that's the Freedom to Vote Act or the John R. Lewis Voter Advancement Act. And now we're calling on an executive order. And we're going to continue to hold accountable every single politician that came into our community and made certain promises that have not made good on that. So my suggestion is that everybody do that and you will see results. I'll give you a perfect example. In Glenn County, everybody was running with Ahmaud, but they just didn't run with Ahmaud. They made sure they registered people to vote, and they elected a new city council, they elected a new mayor, and they elected a new DA. And then they made sure they showed up for jury duty and sent 3 individuals who were responsible for a hate crime to prison. But not only that, they lobbied the state legislature and the governor for Georgia to repeal citizens arrest and to make sure that we had hate crime and enhancements. That's what we were doing all of 2020 and 2021 as we were holding our elected officials accountable. So people saw in real time they could affect change in their local, municipal, and state elections and the actions that were happening.
Now, talking about that, don't you think one of the biggest issues we have as far as getting people involved and and we know apathy is one thing, but we also have mistrust.
Yes.
And mistrust is not just people for some reason think that as African Americans, we just believe everything that other African Americans say, and we're not going to hold them accountable. For some reason, I hear that all the time. Well, y'all always worried about what the other person is doing, but what about such and such that looks like us, is that sitting there and giving out bids to this one and doing this for that one and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's important that people see Georgia as a model, because people need to know that what you are doing there is you are holding people accountable, and you're not just saying, here's the vote and let it go. You're letting these people know that not only are we going to stay on what you're doing and what you're supposed to be doing, but if you don't do what's going to be done in 4 years, we're going to take you out of that seat and replace you with someone else. So what I'm looking at is you actually have a lot of younger people who are getting more involved in politics. You have a lot of people who are doing. Is there anything you guys are doing there to start training and getting these younger people ready to run for office? I say that because one of the biggest things that we find is that we wait until the last minute and throw somebody into a race. They don't have any money they've raised. There's no commercialism. We count on grassroots, which works. But if you're going into a race that's well-funded or the person is well-known, it is hard to get someone who is an unknown into the grasp and be able to make, like, say, a runoff or a good try for the race. What are you guys doing to train, to identify, and to get local? I'm talking about local because local politics is what you have to be doing before you get to before you get to president, congressman. You've got to know your mayor, your police chiefs, your sheriffs, your city councilmen. Here in Louisiana, we have police jurors, aldermen, all of that. The local area is where you start with some of these younger people. I know a lot of people want to run for Congress and Senate, but I'm a firm believer that you have to start. You got to crawl before you walk. And I think that what we haven't done is we haven't, and I say we, I'm talking about across the nation, especially in the African American community, we have not put emphasis into identifying people who are ready to run for office, giving them the available fundraising tools to run, and helping them as far as giving people to go out and precinct walk, identifying people to go out, getting some of these community leaders behind them. So what are you guys doing in Georgia to address those issues?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that was the offshoot of the protests. We had unprecedented number of individuals who were involved in either the resistance or Black Lives Matter or the uprising that occurred because of George Floyd, decide that they were going to run for office. And so in the city of Atlanta alone, they elected about 6 or 7 grassroots activists who are now city council members, many of which I was outside with. Antonio Lewis is a perfect example, was just elected city councilman. He was an organizer of many of the Black Lives Matter protests. So that's one thing they're doing. But we saw a groundswell of individuals deciding that they were going to get involved. And there's certain, organizations, I believe one of them is called Run, Vote, Lead, that are training individuals on how to canvass, how to fundraise, how to run an effective campaign. One of my good friends was the campaign manager for the new mayor of the city of Atlanta, Andre Dickens, and she has been training activists and organizers to run. And so we had a successful turnout, not only in the city of Atlanta, but in all of the municipal races. There were progressive candidates that ran, some of which were successful in winning the seat. City of South Fulton elected a new mayor who was an organizer. Down in rural Georgia, many of the municipal seats were flipped. So I think that we are preparing individuals for that next step of an organizer. People always talk about you're a community organizer, you're an activist. Well, the next step of changing power and having access to the levers of power that can change your community is to run for office. And so I think that training is occurring. There are numerous groups that are doing that work, that are training the individuals to prepare for that next step. Again, I can think of at least 5 people that were outside protesting SB 202 that ran for office. Now, a few of them were successful, but the impetus was that organizing fire, that activist fire that's burning within them. And they are still learning, but we were highly successful in training and running and winning seats because of the energy from organizations and activism.
Now, one of the things that I want to touch on before we go any further is, of course, you are an attorney,
Yes.
Gerald Griggs. You're an activist, but you are an attorney. And you are what we call the truth seeker and the social justice warrior. So I want to talk about, you're involved in several high profile cases, and not just high profile, because I've seen you take some cases that nobody else wants to go forth with. The ones that are not so popular, the ones that are not in the news, the ones that are not well known, you take them on because you know that those people need justice. Even if they're not a popular case, you want to make sure those families have justice. Now, one of the things we talk about that has enabled you to be able to be successful in some of those places is that you have new city council members, new DAs, new people that are in place, that it helps. If you have somebody that's still going under the same Jim Crow, the same laws, the same governing, it's kind of hard to get justice in some of these cases. So I know there are 2 cases that you're working on now. I know you can't really talk to the in-depth of it, but can you walk our audience through just kind of a little bit of what some of these cases do? Because I know there's a lot of sacrifice to your family. You have a family, but you don't have a 9 to 5. There's sometimes you got to leave out and you may not see your family for a couple hours, days, and they sacrifice that time. I think people see the glamorous side of what you do, but they really don't know the actual in-depth time. Some people think it's a big case. You get lots of money. They don't know you've already invested your time and your own money into this. So I just want to make sure that we kind of talk about Gerald Griggs and what you do as an attorney and what some of these cases involve in the sacrifices that not only you, but the families have to make in order to seek justice. Because this isn't just Gerald Griggs and those families. These are looked upon, and a lot of times precedence is made for other cases and other justice. So can you just kind of walk us through a little bit of that?
Absolutely. And I think that's what most people miss. And I think I want to quote one of the people I looked up to in the practice of law. You know, everybody wants to talk about the OJ case, but nobody wants to hear about the No J's. And that's from Johnny Cochran. Many of my cases are like the No J cases, where you don't know the person, but that family's going through trauma of a criminal accusation or an auto accident that almost took that person's life, and now they're doing all the rehabilitation. They don't see that. You know, they see the R. Kelly case, or they see the Vincent Truitt case, or they see the Mod, or they'll see, you know, Rayshard Brooks or something like that, where I'm involved either as an attorney or an activist, and they see, oh, you know, Mr. Griggs is just around for the cameras. They don't see the work that it takes to get that case to wherever it needs to be. You know, I most of the police involved cases that I'm around as an attorney or an activist, I had to go to the crime scene. I had to see the brain matter. I had to comfort a family who just lost a loved one who was killed unjustifiably. I had to see children crying when their mother was brutalized by a law enforcement officer, or there was an unjustifiable murder that occurred, that either I'm defending the person who's accused, or I'm trying to comfort the family who just lost somebody. And so I think what people need to understand is this is a very emotional uh, profession. It's very draining. You know, you're a lawyer 24/7, 7 days a week. There's not a time when you can just cut your phone off and say, I'm not going to answer that call. You know, I just got a call about a case here in Atlanta a couple of days ago where a family has lost their loved one to what I believe is probably unjustifiable killing. And you have to listen to the pain in a family member's voice as they are trying to come to grips with how they're going to bury their loved one, while there's a narrative on TV that's painting them as a criminal. So I think that the most important thing people need to understand is these are real lives. These are real people. And so whatever side of the case you're on, don't think that you understand the pain that both sides are feeling. And that's what I have to grapple with, because, as an attorney, I know what the law says. And the law is not about opinion. It's just not. It's about facts and law, and applying the law to the facts. But in a social media, 24-hour media cycle, you have to combat the various opinions and conspiracy theories and just outlandish stuff that's just out there, and try to keep that away from a family that's grieving the loss of a loved one, that's dealing with a horrific incident that happened to them. Most of the time I meet people, I meet them at the lowest point in their life that they could ever imagine. And I have to try to instill some amount of hope. And so for me, what that typically looks like is I get a phone call, sometimes in the middle of the night, that says, Mr. Griggs, X, Y, and Z just happened. I have no idea how to deal with this, and I need your help. What typically happens after that, I have to get in my car and drive to somebody's house, walk into the house, and listen to a family at its lowest point possible, and try to figure out a way that we can make this situation less painful and more just. Sometimes it ends up on TV, but 9 times out of 10, it does not. And most of the time, no one will remember what you did except for the one family member whose life you changed, the one client's life who was spared, or who was prevented from some great travesty. So for me, the reason why I do this is because, I feel a need to help people. I feel a need to help people at their lowest point. And I don't do it for fame. I definitely don't do it for fortune. So, when people want to know more about me, all I would say is I've been blessed to have some of the best mentors that I could imagine, whether that's Fred Gray, who worked with me on the Black Voters Matter case, who was Dr. King's lawyer and Rosa Parks' lawyer and Claudette Colvin's lawyer, to Judge Gino Brogdon, who was a Fulton County Superior Court judge when I was a public defender. I was a public defender in Rockdale County, and I was thinking about giving up. And he said, Gerald, who is going to defend the voice of the voiceless if you give up? That was my first year of practice. He said, all you have to do is be an expert in the law, so that everyone in that courtroom can look at you and understand how the law works in practice. And so, that's why I do it. And a lot of people think that I don't hear the noise on social media. I don't hear the comments. I don't see what certain people are saying about me. But I really don't care, because at the end of the day, I'm going to take that pressure that's attempted to be put on my clients and put it back on the system, and make sure the system works effectively for their justice. So whether I'm on the side of a case you like, or I'm on the side of a case you don't like, at the end of the day, I'm supposed to be the most zealous advocate within the bounds of the law for my client, one client at a time. And most of the time, I'm pretty good at that. So, a day in the life of Gerald Griggs, practice of law, is always different. Every day is different. But the thing I love is to be able to say, we provided a little bit of justice for that family. We provided a little bit of justice for that client that was unjustly accused of something they didn't do. We made sure that Georgia law was applied, that constitutional precedent was applied, and that we didn't go one step backward. And so, that's just a little bit of insight into what it's like to do this. I hope that one day when I'm done, it will have inspired some young lawyer out there, some young person, to make sure that they not only earn the respect of their descendants, but they earn the respect of their ancestors, because they kept that fight. John Lewis once told me, Gerald, I heard a voice on the radio. He was a profound speaker, and I knew I just wanted to get to see him. So I wrote him a letter, and he said he was going to send a bus ticket, and he called me the boy from Troy. That was Dr. King. I think John Lewis made Dr. King proud. So my hope is that one day I can make Representative Lewis proud, even though he's no longer here. And I think we're well on the way, because we're going to make sure that we protect our voting rights, not just in words, but in action. So that's why we done gotten on the bus and gone, and on the plane and gone up to Washington, D.C. and gotten in some good trouble. That's why we got on the bus and went to Louisville, Kentucky twice to fight with the family of Breonna Taylor. That's why we got on the bus and went to Chattanooga. We've been down to Selma. We're going to go back to Selma. We're going to go back to Glenn County probably next week for the federal trial. We're going to make sure justice is served. And so that's just how I see it. Hopefully, I'm doing the right thing, and making sure that justice is fair and equitable. And if people don't like that, oh well. My clients seem to like it, and I think that it's inspiring young people to understand it's not 1850, it's not 1950. We're not 3/5 of a person. We have certain rights, and we're going to enforce those rights every time you try to take them away from us.
Well, I will tell you, Attorney Griggs, that I think you and others like you are inspiring others. The National Bar Association says there is an increase in the amount of African American males into law by 17.8% in the last 2 years. There is also a percentage of 27.3% more African American law enforcement officers. There has been an increase of 9.8% jury duty by African Americans. So one thing that I am is that we can hear somebody say something, like you said, it can be on social media. People lie, facts don't. And so when we look at these numbers, when I look at these numbers, when I hear you speak and I see these numbers, I understand that we're making a difference. I think that people want not only change, but justice to be swift, and it's not. We are a part of a movement, and in a movement, it's not tomorrow, it's a marathon. We're still running it. But I can look at people like you and know that there is change, and there's a possibility, and there's hope. And so when younger attorneys look, and they're, like you said, you were down and you were ready to quit, and somebody offered you an ear and told you, don't stop. What would you say to a young attorney right now who has maybe been in law for 4 or 5 years and feels like there's nothing they're doing that's making a difference? I think this happens to a lot of public defenders because they see a lot of wrong and they have so many people. You might have 40 to 50 people you have to defend in 1 week, and you don't feel like that person's getting adequate justice. What would you say to that young attorney, sharing insight on what they should do to hold on?
You have to understand the fundamental underpinnings of this system. This is an adversarial system, which means that you have the two advocates going at each other to determine what is the facts and what's justice. And if you feel like you're being overwhelmed by the system, it's time to do what every great lawyer has ever done to the system. You can't fight the system head up. But what you can do is turn the finger back on the system. If they're saying your client did X, Y, and Z, you're not trying to prove that your client is innocent. It's their job to prove that your client is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Once you understand the fundamental rules of the game, then you can overcome the system. So again, I take the first real case that I sort of understood what was going on. I was in either the 10th or the 11th grade, and I was watching the O.J. Simpson trial. And I was sitting there watching a lawyer just take the state's case apart. And I didn't understand what he was doing. But I was like, I just want to be that. And so as I matriculated through high school and into college, I started learning the law and understanding that everything that you watch on the news is not what actually happened, and that criminals are only determined to be a criminal after a jury has convicted them with proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you can look at the state's case and say, wow, they didn't talk to this witness, and they didn't do this forensic examination, and they didn't test this alibi, you can start saying, I don't care if I'm a public defender with 50 cases on the calendar. If I announce ready and each case takes a week to try, there's only 52 weeks in the year. They're not going to try everything. And I'm going to free my client because I'm being a zealous advocate within the bounds of the law. When you start hearing stuff like, this person been doing this for years, it's no way you can prove that a certain R&B star did all these things. Why don't I just gather up all the witnesses? Why don't I provide the proof? You'd be amazed what this system can do when you force the system to do what it says it's supposed to do. Or you do what Dr. King said, make the Constitution what it appears on paper for everyone. So down in Brunswick, Georgia, you just force them to try this case in a court of law where the witnesses can come in and the videotape can be played. And the videotape spoke for itself. So what I would say to the young lawyers, never let anyone tell you you can't do something. Always study the law, but also study the great lawyers of the past. Look at their strengths, look at their weaknesses, look at how they analyzed the case and applied the facts of that case to the current precedent. Or if you don't like that precedent, then fight to appeal to change the precedent. One of the most interesting things that I experienced in law school was there was a Supreme Court justice that came to my school my first year. And his name was Anton Scalia. And I didn't quite agree with his philosophy. He was an originalist, which means that he believes that the Constitution should be applied the way it's originally written. And of course, we all know that the way the Constitution was originally written was not written for most of the people in this country. So I asked him that question. He gave a long speech and asked if there were any questions. And so I looked around as he was asking, were there any questions? I remember my constitutional law professor, giving this excoriating speech about Justice Scalia a few days before. So I said to myself, well, I might as well ask him the question. So I raised my hand and he said, you in the back. And I said, Justice Scalia, I have a question. And he said, okay, what's your question? And I said, Justice Scalia, I understand you're an originalist, which means that you believe the Constitution should be applied the way it's originally written. But Judge, how do you reconcile the fact that when the Constitution was originally written, 90% of the American people today would not have any rights? So how can we apply a standard of rights that didn't apply to the people that are asking for rights? I thought it was a reasonable question. He pondered for a moment, got mad, and said, you see, that's why I don't like answering questions to you liberals. I mean, I didn't consider myself a liberal at that point. I was a law student. But it taught me a lesson that day. All I had to do was listen to my law professors who had said the same thing 2 or 3 days earlier and ask the person in power, and speak truth to power, both in season and out of season. And it served me well. So to the young lawyers, don't be afraid to speak truth to power, both in season and out of season, because you never know. At some point, power will bend to facts and the law and truth. And so, you know, hopefully one day I'll get to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court. I've already argued before the Georgia Supreme Court. And we'll make sure that our ancestors are very well represented, because let me let y'all in a little secret. We have rights. They're not going anywhere. They can use the states' rights arguments. They can use all of these things that say we're not going backwards. But the way we keep ourselves from going backwards is making sure we don't go backwards. So we got to be like Thurgood. We got to be like Fred Gray. We got to be like C.B. King and Donald Lee Hollowell. All of these names that you've heard that are historical figures, well, just go study them and see they were normal individuals who decided to speak truth to power. So learn how to speak truth to power. It will never let you down.
And in conclusion of speaking truth to power, we introduced you as Vice President Gerald Griggs of the NAACP. I think the next time I speak with you, that title may be changed. Now, we know that you aren't into titles and that you're not concerned about having a title attached to you because you've been fighting for a very long time without a title. You don't need it. But I would be remiss if I did not speak to the fact that you are right now in the running for president of the NAACP. And we already know that you have not only the fortitude, but you have the sacrifice, you have the drive, you have the history, and you definitely have put in the work. So before we let you exit the show, I want you to speak to those people who will be voting on this, those people who may not know what is going on in the NAACP, the elections, and anything else that you want to say to that before you exit the program. So I want you to be able to explain to people what's happening, when the election is going forth, who's voting, and just a little bit about it before you leave the show.
I appreciate that. And, you know, it's interesting. I've been in the NAACP 8 years, and I never saw myself being anything other than a servant or a foot soldier. And currently, I've been asked by numerous people to run for the position of state president of the Georgia NAACP. And the reason why I offered myself for president is I believe that we are at a pivotal time in our history where we need someone that understands the historical perspective of the NAACP, the power that is contained in the Georgia State Conference, and how to stand up to powers that want to push us backward. And so, as you said, I've never been into titles. I just wanted to help and want to do the work. But when I see the alt-right marching in Charlottesville, when I see Confederate monuments attempting to become real people through CRT and the banning of critical race theory, when I see voter suppression running rampant around the South, I can think of no greater place than to be the bastion of civil rights than the NAACP, and then the state conference of the Georgia NAACP, where you have had legends and luminaries like Julian Bond and W.W. Law out of Savannah, and Donald Lee Hollowell and C.B. King and Martin Luther King Sr., so John Dale Johnson and so many others. But I see myself as a tie between the past and the future. I don't really see myself being the president long, because I want to raise up a generation of fighters that will come into the NAACP, continue that legacy that we've had over 100 years, but also understand that it's our responsibility to stand on the wall and say it stops here. You know, the NAACP in New York used to have a flag that sat outside that said a man was lynched today. We need to put that flag back outside. But the NAACP didn't just tell you that a man was lynched yesterday. They did something about it. And so for y'all that have been watching Mothers of the Movement, you'll notice a large luminary figure of the NAACP in that movie. His name was Roy Wilkins. He was the president of the NAACP. He met with Mamie Till Mobley, and he helped launch that campaign. And that reminded me of a situation in Brunswick, Georgia, where a president of the Brunswick chapter, John Perry, met with a mother and started a movement. That's what the NAACP should be about. That's what the NAACP will be about under my watch. And that's what we are going to continue forward, because we're not going to rest on the laurels of the past of what we did in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or 2000. We're looking forward to 2024, 2030, 2035. And the young people that were in the streets need to understand that they will have protection from the oldest, the boldest, the most cussed and discussed civil rights organization this country has ever known. The NAACP was the first Black Lives Matter. We've been dealing with police brutality and racial injustice since the beginning. But it's time for us to stand up and say it does not continue anymore, not on our watch. So I humbly ask for your vote. Anyone that's a member of the Georgia State Conference, if you're not a member of the Georgia State Conference and you're in another state, call a member of the Georgia State Conference or call a family member and say, go get involved in the Georgia State Conference. Because yes, I've been doing work a long time, but some of my mentors said, Gerald, you got to organize. You got to organize. You cannot do this alone. And so I'm humbly offering myself as the next president of the state conference of the Georgia NAACP. I can promise you one thing. The state conference will be active. It will be on the front lines. And no president, no governor, no mayor will ever think to say anything about the rights of people of color, but particularly Black people, without fear of the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP. You know, I can remember being on American Race with Charles Barkley. I was sitting across from a man by the name of Richard Spencer. He was a leader of the alt-right. And I tried to warn the country before Charlottesville that this organization was not an American organization. We all saw what happened. I'm standing here now trying to warn the country that if we don't push back, peaceful and nonviolent, but push back on where this country is going, our children are going to ask us, what were y'all doing 2016, 2017, 2018, 2020, 2021, 2022, when it was our Selma moment, when it was our Edmund Pettus Bridge, when it was our moment to march on Washington. As for me in the Georgia State Conference, we're going to be on the front line, pushing back, making sure we don't take one step back. So for all of those reasons, I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking for your support. I'm asking for your prayers. But more importantly, I'm asking for your help to move the state conference of the NAACP forward. We currently have not set a date yet. The election was pushed back. It was supposed to be January the 8th of 2022. We are hopeful that in the first quarter, there will be an election sometime in March or April. but I hope to continue to earn your vote. I'm traveling around the state, speaking to local branches. I will come to other states. I spoke with the Youth Council for South Carolina. I'm hoping to speak with the Youth Council for Florida. Already spoken with Georgia's Youth Council. And I truly believe that we have to listen to the voices of the young people. They are the ones that are in the streets. They are the ones that are the energy of this movement. They are the ones that should lead. But I'm hopeful that I have what it takes to win this election. And I pray that I'll be able to help the state conference.
Well, we have appreciated your insight and we have appreciated everything that you have given us tonight. We have been honored to have you as a part of our show. And I would say that I know your ancestor. I know my papa, Dr. Benjamin Mays, will be very proud of you. And so would Dr. King and so many others. We all stand on the shoulders of so many that have come before us. And it is not what we do behind closed doors, it's what we do in this moment. And if we fear our economics, our status, our title, a lot of people don't get involved because they fear losing things. And so we have to stand strong and stand firm, as you say, for the issues that are affecting our communities. We don't have to be, we know it's nonviolent because none of us want to get out there and get violent or put anybody in harm's way, but we want justice and fairness. And this is just exactly what you're standing for and what others are standing for. But it takes those people in positions like presidents of the NAACP and presidents of ACLU and all those other organizations to stand firm and to have a voice. And so we would suggest to the people of Georgia that they not just listen to your words, but look at your actions. You have been standing firm and you continue to stand without the applause, without the accreditation, accommodations, and everything else. That's one of the things that we admire about you, is one of the reasons why we wanted you on the show. So I appreciate you taking the time out. I know how valuable your time is. So I appreciate it. And I just want to thank you. And we look forward to having you back on the show a little bit longer and maybe closer to the summer. Hopefully we have a little bit more activity going on in different cities and we can speak on some of the things that we've done and some of the things that you guys have accomplished even more in the state of Georgia. So thank you, Attorney Griggs.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I'm appreciative of the platform. Whenever you guys need me, I will be here. I will make time. I make time for movement. I make time for change. So don't ever worry about me not having time. Just if you call on me, I'll be there. Because if it wasn't for your pop-up, I wouldn't be here. My dad went to Morehouse. My mom went to Spelman. So I understand how powerful a man Benjamin Elijah Mays was and the legacy and the leaders that he built. And hopefully, we can continue that legacy.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you.